Welcome to the Bookistrator, where I share the stories I love through illustration. I hope you're ready for another long one, because if you look at that timestamp, that's what you're signing up for. I've done 2 Mermaid videos on this channel so far. One released in December and is a tribute to the Mermaid challenge for 2024, and the other released just a few weeks ago for that same challenge, but this time the 2025 entry. If you have no idea what challenge I'm talking about or what Mermay is, I would recommend going to watch those videos first, as I take the time to explain it better there. I released them first, knowing I would want to put them out in order of when I painted them. That way you can maybe see some progression or regression when you look at them all together. With this video, we're now caught up. This is my entry for Mermay 2026. And I'm so excited to share the illustration, the process of creating it, and the story I wrote to go along with it. I'd love to hear your thoughts below if you have time to leave a comment afterwards. And likes and shares are always greatly appreciated. Speaking of appreciation, I need to shout out some friends of mine who helped with editing this story. Emilee, John, and Renee, thank you so much. Your suggestions made this story so much better, and I hope you enjoy the changes I made. With that, let's get into the time-lapse. The men came for her just as the sun was starting to dip under the sea. They said the well was dried up, that only the body of a mermaid could bring the water back and save the village. Humans think a lot of wrong things when they are desperate, when they are thirsty, when they are afraid. Morwen was hauled from her home by a net pulled by 3 bearded and large men. The mermaid hissed and fought with tail and nail, desperate to escape. But the humans could not be stopped. They placed her roughly in a type of box with wheels, still bound in the net. They crossed over hills and bridges, in and out of a forest, until they finally stopped at a small cluster of houses. On the far side, near the woods, was an old well. Morwen had heard of wells from her mother and older sisters. Humans could not breathe or drink salt water, so they tapped into the earth to bring fresh water closer to their homes. The men dumped the wheeled cart so that she flopped to the ground. Then they dragged her by the net once more and hoisted her up over the lip of the well. Morwen tightened her fingers on the net, keeping a fierce grip as they tried to tip her out of it and down the stone throat. The smallest of the 3 large men pried her fingers apart, her strength no match for his own. With a final shove and an involuntary scream, Morwen fell. Her shoulder crashed against the wall, scraping down her back and upper fin. The pain was sharp and rough. And then she hit the water. She lay there, stunned, barely covered in the shallow water. It was thick with mud. It was cold. It was dark. Finally, she eased herself upright, leaning her raw back against the stones of the circular wall. She strained her neck up to see the opening of the well's mouth. A little light streamed down on her. Most of it was covered up by a small roof atop 2 large beams. A thinner bar crossed this, with a bit of frayed rope attached to it. One of the men jabbed his head down to watch her, then pulled away, his soft footsteps retreating. She heard them congratulate each other as they left. Alone now, Morwen took in her surroundings. The stones around her were green with moss. The water lapped at her hips and fin gently, still trying to flatten out after she moved. She shifted her tail and found it was too cramped for her to stretch out. Fear spiked in her gut. Her breathing turned rapid. She'd never been in such a tight place. The open waters of her home in the sea were endless. She scrabbled her fingers along the mossy rock walls, then tried pulling herself up onto them. The wet plant life sloughed off in its perch, and her hands fell back into the water. Morwen felt a numbness settle into her limbs, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that there was no way to escape. She couldn't scale the walls, they were too slippery. She had no legs or feet to propel her upwards. She couldn't compel the water to do her bidding like most humans said in their stories. She was as mortal as they were, and she was trapped. As the hours passed, people poked their heads up over the lip to stare down at her. There were gasps and laughter and happy chattering. "Our very own mermaid," they said. "This will bring back the waters in a few days, I'm absolutely sure," they said. Thank goodness you found it when you did, they said. Morwen kept silent, eyes downcast, tightening her arms across her torso. When the adults, tired of looking at her, the children arrived. At first, their high voices were filled with excitement as they took turns looking down the well. Then they grew annoyed and began to shout at her. Say something, they said. Do something, they said. Is it already dead? They said. Morwen listened with only half an ear. Her eyes were heavy-lidded, her posture slumped into the muddy water. She thought of her sea, of the fish who would slip by her in the depths with their shimmering scales, so similar to hers. She thought of her older sisters, all gone and married now with daughters of their own. She thought of her mother, lost a year ago. For a brief moment she felt a spark of fury light in her heart, but just as quickly it was doused by resignation. There was nothing she could do to escape, so why fight back? Lost in thought, eyes now closed, she didn't know about the rock until it landed on her bent tail. Morwen lurched upright, fin thrashing, the pain a dull thud hammering through her body. Her fingers searched, and finding the rock, she gripped it hard. It's alive! The children screeched and giggled. Get more stones! Morwen's heart plummeted. There was nowhere to hide, nothing to shelter her. She heard them return moments later, and watched as small pebbles began to fall above her, shifting to avoid their impacts. A larger girl lifted up a truly massive rock, grunting as she hefted it onto the lip. The two of them made eye contact. Her face reminded the mermaid of the men who had taken her from the beach. They'd been delighted by her fear, too. Morwen lifted the first of the rocks, sitting up straight. She arced her arm, prepared to throw just as the child started to shove her own weapon over the edge. Morwen snarled, but held very still, ready to move when she could tell where it would land. But then a voice rang out. Stop this, it cried. The children's laughter died, and the large rock remained perched on the edge. The children's faces disappeared as they turned towards whoever had spoken. Morwen kept her stone raised. You want the water to come back, right? The older female voice said, quieter now. Tormenting this creature won't bring it. We have to wait for it to die, just like the storyteller said. We were only checking that it was still. The child was cut off. No, you were bored. Go do something useful with your time. I heard your mother calling for you, Nettle. And Mary Joan, your grandfather, was waiting for his supper. Off with you all, lazy and wicked children, before I tell your parents. This last part was shouted as Morwen heard a half-dozen small feet run away. Soft footsteps approached now, and then a face peered over and looked down at her. It was a young woman, nearing her 20s if her face was any indication. Her hair was pulled back by red fabric, her cheeks round and freckled. She stared at Morwen. I'm sorry about them, she said. Morwen didn't move. Surprised she was being talked to, not at. They're usually very well-behaved children. The lack of water, she trailed off. Then continued. Everyone is on edge, but that doesn't excuse them to treat you like a caged animal. Morwen spoke, her voice dry but strong. I am a caged animal. The young woman startled, voice squeaking out, You can speak? Morwen looked away, tracing the moss near her fin. I mean, the girl said, if you can speak, then why didn't you? The children wouldn't have bothered you so much if you had talked to them a little. Morwen glared at the girl. I am here to die, yes? Why would I need to entertain my tormentors? The girl sputtered, saying, They're just kids, surely you can... Morwen snarled. The human jumped, backing away from the well. She returned moments later, peeking her face over the edge slowly. She waited, fidgeting with fingers on the stones. Finally, the girl spoke again. I'll keep the kids away from the well. Morwen kept her gaze harsh, unspeaking. After a few moments, the girl left. When the human returned the next day, she shared that her name was Beth. Morwen didn't respond, keeping her eyes on the dark water lapping only a few inches above the mud. Do you have a name? Beth asked. She paused. Do mermaids have names? Morwen rolled her eyes and huffed out a stale breath of air. We do, she said, unable to help herself. But you do not deserve to know mine. Beth gasped, her rosy cheeks darkening. She didn't return till the following evening. This time when the human returned, Morwen was lying on her back, fin in the air. She was trying to soak her injuries from the fall in the hopes that it would soothe the pain. The water barely reached her ears, but the mud was cool and soothing. Beth stuck her head over the wall and startled Morwen by talking. "What are you doing?" the human asked. The mermaid flopped her tail over quickly and scooted until she was once again sitting upright. She didn't speak and kept her eyes on the stone walls across from her. A loud and deep voice shouted from far away, probably near the houses. "Hurry up!" it spoke. Morwen's heart raced at the man's voice. "I'm coming," Beth replied loudly. She tied a rope to the bar at the top of the well, then began to wind something off to the side Morwen couldn't see. Finally, a bucket lurched over the edge of the well and swung into open space, attached to the rope. Beth began to lower the bucket down until it was only a few handspans from Morwen's fin. "Fill this with water, will you?" the girl asked. Morwen nodded her brow. "Why would I help you?" she replied. The human looked worried. "Please, if you don't fill the bucket for me, old man Charles will do it instead, and he won't be as patient with you." Morwen scowled. What could he do to her from here? Besides, she didn't want to give up any of the water in the well to the humans. If she was supposed to be stuck down here, the least they could do is let her keep the muddy water. "Please," Beth pleaded. "I volunteered to do this so that he wouldn't—" She stopped herself. "I'm trying to help you," she finished. Morwen searched the girl's face. It was raked with fear. Was she in danger, too? Loud, stomping footsteps began to draw near. Beth whirled around to the sound just as Morwen jolted upright to grab the bucket. She pulled it lower, sunk it into the muck, and then released it just as Beth spun back. The human girl noticed the sloshing water inside and began to pull it back up. When it reached the top, she untied the rope and set the bucket down. Just in time, the angry footsteps arrived, with an angrier voice attached to them. "What is taking so long?" the man's voice asked. Morwen couldn't see either of the humans, but she could hear Beth stammer, There wasn't much water left. It was difficult to tip it over, but I have it now." There was a huff, and then a grizzled male face peered down at Morwen. She kept her expression fierce, her lips curling defiantly. "The water isn't rising," he said. "Not yet," Beth agreed. "We ought to have slit her throat when we tossed her down. It's the blood that brings the water back, you know." Beth was quiet. At least that's what that storyteller said, talking about some goddess mermaid whose blood could bring the rain. Best we could find was this pathetic specimen. He crooked an eyebrow at Morwen. Too bad this village is filled with soft-hearted folks who took the coward's way out, of slowly starving you to death instead. He turned and Morwen heard a sloshing noise. He'd likely picked up the bucket. After a solid chunk of time, his footsteps long since gone, Morwen heard a small sob. She looked up and saw just the top of Beth's fabric tied around her hair, peeking over the well lip. Morwen waited a few minutes, listening to the quiet sniffling. It reminded her of her sister when she learned their mother was gone. Against her better judgment, Morwen asked, "What's wrong?" A few stifled sniffs echoed down the well, and then Beth's face appeared, redder than it had ever been. She wiped at her gleaming nose, then spoke. "The water isn't coming back." "No," Morwen agreed. Beth gripped the well and leaned so that only the top of her head was visible again. In a tiny voice, almost too small to hear, Beth said, "My mother is sick." Morwen waited, something like dread pooling in her stomach. Beth continued with another sniff. "She has a strange illness. The doctor who came a few months back wasn't sure what's wrong with her, but the lack of water isn't helping. It isn't helping any of us. We don't know what to do. We can't keep the crops alive. We can't keep people alive." Morwen paused, then said, "Leave this place and travel to where there's more water." "You don't understand," Beth gasped. "This is our home. We've lived here for generations. My grandparents are buried here. My father, my little sisters, our whole lives. We poured our sweat and blood into the earth to grow our crops and raise our livestock, to build our homes." She huffed as she stared, furious, at Morwen. "And that is why you brought me here," the mermaid said simply. Beth looked away, out at the woods or fields around them. I cannot bring the water back, Morwen said quietly. I have no magic in me but the fact that I'm a creature of both sea and land. I have no power to bring back your water. Slowly, Beth's eyes came back to Morwen's face. You can't? She whispered. No. Beth hunched. You're lying to save your own life. Morwen said simply, I am not. Beth shot upright, turned, and left, heavy footsteps retreating. Beth returned 2 days later. It was fully dark, and Morwen was sleeping, her body pulled into a circle to fit better inside the well. Her stomach ached with hunger. Her mouth was dry as sand. Her body was weak and cramped and tired. She was awoken when Beth dropped a tiny pebble into the center of the water. Startled, she snapped her gaze up, but kept her body still. Seeing that it was the human girl, she eased herself into a sitting position and waited. Beth leaned against the well lip, hands folded under her chin. With a shaky breath, she said, My mother died yesterday. Morwen jolted straight up. The mud sucked at her tail, leaving tiny waves to splash against the rocks. She began, I am sorry that she died. Beth rocked forward and back, hiding her face in her arms. Her breathing was quick. Morwen ran a finger along a dry rock. Her tail ached at being bunched up for so long. She feared humans, hated them and all that they did to her kind, but this girl was hurting. Morwen felt that sharing pain could sometimes help to ease it, and maybe this girl deserved a little kindness. My mother was taken by humans last year, she began. We'd been sunbathing on some rocks near the shore. It was such a peaceful day. Morwen paused as she heard Beth's breathing slow. She continued. We always slept in shifts so that one of us could keep an eye out for danger. She was on watch, so saw the men coming. She shook me awake and told me what was happening. I dove into the water, but when I turned around, she wasn't behind me. I surfaced again and watched them drag her to the beach. It wasn't nets they used, though, but a harpoon. Morwen stopped, her words stuttering out. A small voice from above said, I'm sorry they took your mother. Morwen ducked her head, brimming with tears she didn't have the water to shed. There was a loud sniff from above, then a smack. Morwen looked up and saw that Beth had slapped the inside of the well. Beth halted. Her light-colored hair was scattered around her face, the normal fabric missing. I believe you. Morwen's eyes widened. I believe that you can't bring the water back. I believe that what my village has done is cruel. She fingered the stone above. And that you don't have to die in this well. It won't save us. Morwen couldn't help the small gasp as she let out. I want to save my village, Beth continued, but this isn't the way. I don't want this. Beth turned away, then heaved something heavy onto the well. She huffed as a coil of what Morwen recognized as rope came undone, snaking down a foot length into her prison. Beth heaved at one end, reaching it over the bar that had held the bucket days earlier. Then she began to lower the coil down, unspooling it as she went. Morwen watched the rope jerkily descend until it pooled onto her fin and sunk into the water next to her. She reached out a hand and curled her fingers around the coarse rope, the fibers sticking into her skin. Morwen looked up, locking eyes with Beth. The girl was smiling, tears sparkling in her eyes. My plan, she said, is to haul you out. Then we'll get you back to your sea. I'll steal the wheelbarrow if I have to. She leaned back. But first, make a noose with the end I sent down and slip your fin into it. A noose? Morwen asked. Beth scratched her head. Make a circle with the rope and then tie one end. It needs to be large enough for your tail to fit through. Do you know how to tie a knot? Yes, Morwen nodded, pulling on the rope to bring more down to her. We used to watch the sailors, and we would make bags for collecting kelp with the ropes we stole from them. Beth smiled again. No tears this time. Morwen hauled on the rope, fingers weary but determined, while the human girl kept a grip on the other end at the top. She threaded the cord under her stiff tail, then pulled the end up and began to loop it around and tie a knot at about eye height. Finished, she pulled hard on the end, then shifted till her upper tail was snugly in the rope's cradle. She clasped both hands on the rope, then looked back up at Beth. The girl nodded, then stepped back. The rope went taut, and Morwen could feel it tighten underneath and around the girth of her tail. There was a tug and a grunt from above, and then the mermaid was lifted. It was an inch, then 2, then 5. Slowly she began to rise, water and mud dripping from her tail, hair, and chest. But moments later, her upward crawl stopped. "Beth?" Morwen called, worried. There was a grunt from above, and then Morwen fell. Again. She landed with a splash in the shallow water, the rope smacking her in the face. There was a scrambling sound above, and then the rope slackened further. Beth's freckle face peered over the edge. Her cheeks were red. "I can't," she huffed. "I can't do it. You're too heavy." Morwen scowled. "I'm gonna go get help," Beth said. "No," Morwen yelled. "Don't. We'll think of something else." Beth looked down at her. "But there's no other way out." "There must be," Morwen insisted. Beth leaned against the well, fingering the rope. "There isn't. Either I go get help or you stay in there." Morwen slapped her fin against the water, frustrated. The splash peppered her face with droplets. Calming herself, she asked, "Are they people you can trust?" "Yes," Beth replied. She was gone for over an hour. Morwen stewed with worry. She kept the rope around her, fingers tight. What if this was some kind of trap? What if the people of the village realized that keeping her in the well wasn't bringing the water they needed, so they were going to bleed her like that man had said? The voices from above quickly silenced her speculating thoughts. Beth's face peered over the edge once more. She waved at Morwen, then turned back to the hushed voices around her. "I'll take the front position, my foot braced against the stone wall. You all grab the rope behind me and pull when I say, got it?" A chorus of children's voices agreed. Morwen startled. Was it the same kids who had thrown rocks at her a few days ago? She didn't have much time to think it over before Beth called out quietly, but with force. "Ready and heave!" Morwen felt the rope tighten once more, and her body lifted through the water. A small army of high voices grunted along with Beth's as they strained to lift the mermaid higher. She made it several feet up before Beth called a halt. "Are you all right, Miss Mermaid?" she asked. "Hurry," Morwen replied with gritted teeth. The cord was cutting into the underside of her tail and pressed in on the sides. She kept her muscles taut in the hopes that it would lessen the pain. The ascension felt like an eternity, with kids crying out, Beth telling them to keep going, and the rope hurting more and more, and the exit never looking any closer. But then the wisp of a breeze fluttered its fingers against Morwen's face, and she realized with surprise that her head was above the well. Hands small and large reached out and pulled her over the edge. She clung to the rope, bringing it with her. Finally, she was on the ground. The grass was cool beneath her scales. She looked around at the humans standing near, looking down at her in a circle. Beth was sweating, her face red, something Morwen was getting used to seeing. The children were all young, Beth by far being the oldest. They were similarly red-faced, and they all looked a little shocked, curious, and tired. Morwen curled in on herself, unsure of their friendliness. "We did it!" Beth cried. The children around them began to smile and pat each other on the back, comparing the red marks and cuts on their palms from the rope. Morwen, still wary, let a small smile form on her lips. She allowed the rope to be taken from her white fingers. One of the older children, the girl who had tried to drop that large rock on her, left the group. Morwen watched her go, nervous. Beth looked around at them all, then placed her hands on her hips. "Nettle, you and Bolly, wrap the rope back up and return it to the farmer's shed." A girl and a boy scampered over to the well to do what she said. "Mary Joan, you take the youngest children home. Well done on the good work." Several children headed off towards the village. Morwen's eyes wandered over the path they took, the few sparse houses and the woods pushing in around them. The moon was bright above, and for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of peace. This was the same moon she gazed at from the sea. Soon the older girl who'd left returned, pushing the box with wheels. Morwen assumed it was the same one that brought her here. Inside was a small bottle with sloshing liquid inside. Beth and the other remaining children heaved her into the box, a wheelbarrow they called it. Her tail dangled out the front, but not far enough to be run over. The girl who had brought this transportation uncorked the bottle she brought and offered it to Morwen. "Water?" the mermaid asked. "I stole a bit from the rain barrel in town," the girl said. The others around them gasped. The girl stood taller, then said, "I added some salt to it." Then she hung her head. "I'm sorry I planned to throw a rock on you. That wasn't good." "Thank you," Morwen said, taking the bottle. She filled her mouth with the cool, if a little dirty-tasting water. The salt was faint, but electric. How she ached for the sea. She felt completely dried out, and her cracked lips agreed. "All of you head back," Beth said. "I'll get our mermaid here back home safely." The children talked over each other, explaining how helpful they would be on the journey. "We could take turns pushing," they said. "We could be lookouts for danger," they said. "You can't do it alone," they said. But Beth silenced them all with a simple statement. "You all have people who will be wondering where you are. I can get to the sea and back without anyone noticing I've even left." With a lurch, Beth tilted the wheelbarrow forward and began to walk. Morwen watched the children in their small group. Several waved their goodbyes. She and Beth crossed through the forest, over a bridge and down several hills. They stopped only twice. Beth was huffing and sweating so much that Morwen was sure she would pass out. Finally, they could hear the waves as they descended the final hill. They struggled across the sand of the beach as the wheel sunk and became stuck, over and over. Beth kept pushing, and finally they made it to the edge of the sea. She tipped the wheelbarrow carefully on its side, arms shaking, and helped Morwen out. The mermaid sat on the sand, running the grains through her fingers. "We did it," Beth gasped, falling to her knees. "Almost," amended Morwen. She looked at the sea, the sun beginning to peak above the horizon now. Morwen stretched out her tail to its full length. She could feel her muscles and bones ease, no longer cramped in that horrible well or wheelbarrow. All of her instincts told her to dive into the water, immerse herself in the surf, and swim as fast as she could before this human changed her mind. She looked at Beth, at her face, which was once again redder than it had ever been, the effort she had used to bring her home. "What will you tell the village?" she asked. Beth looked uncertain. "I'm not sure," she said, her breath finally evening out. "What your people did was wrong," Morwen said. "But you believed me and got me out of that horrible well." The girl was looking at her, eyes weary. "You have no one to return to?" Morwen asked. The girl shook her head, now eyeing the sand. "Would you like to come with me?" Beth's face snapped up. "What? I thought you said that mermaids don't have magical abilities." "We can't control the water. Only gods can do that, like the story that old man was talking about. But in certain instances, we can turn a human. Would you..." Morwen hesitated. "Would you like to be a mermaid?" "I don't even know your name," Beth laughed. Morwen arched her back to the sea and said, "Mermaids do in fact have names, and mine is Morwen." "Morwen," Beth repeated. The mermaid eased forward onto her hands and waded into the surf. As the water covered her, running its fingers through her hair and wetting her chapped lips, she gulped in a lungful of salt water, breathing correctly for the first time in days. After a few moments of being fully submerged, she swam back to the surface and poked her head and chest above the water. Beth was still kneeling on the beach, looking after her in the surf. Then she stood, dusted the sand from her skirt, and walked forward. When she was waist deep and only a few feet from Morwen, she stopped. She reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out the red fabric she always wore tied around her hair. She offered it to the mermaid. Morwen swam closer and took the cloth. "It's a kerchief," Beth explained. "You use it to hold your hair back. My mother made it for me." Morwen clutched it to her chest. "You're not coming?" she asked. Beth shook her head. Then she smiled. "Someone needs to help the village move along. It's our home, but it'll be nothing but a graveyard if we stay any longer." We've been here for generations, and the land and water have always been bad. It's time we make a change. Will they listen to you? I have friends who see things the way I do now. Those kids will help me again, I'm sure of it. I hope you can convince them, Morwen said. I hope you can stay free, Beth said. The two girls smiled once more at each other, and then went their separate ways. Beth trudged through the waves, righted the wheelbarrow, and started the long walk home. Morwen tied the kerchief to her wrist and dove deep into the waves, letting the salt water ease her pain and the days of fear. All humans are dangerous. She still believed that. But maybe there were more good people out there than bad. Maybe anyone can learn to change. I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I'd love to hear your thoughts on this painting or the story. I really would like to know what you think. Do you agree with Beth or Morwen? Do you think the village was justified? What was your favorite part of the painting? Least favorite part of the story? Or anything else you want to talk about? I started this channel in order to share my love of illustration and stories, so with these mermaid videos, I'm always curious to see what people are thinking when they hear and see them. And please remember to like and subscribe. These videos are hours upon hours to get out to you guys, and I'd love to someday monetize the channel. I appreciate all of you so much for being here. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day or night, and hope to see you again in the next one. Bye!